Good morning, friends. The lecture today we have in our refresher course on film studies is Cinema and Pedagogy, the changing terrain of English studies in India and the world. This lecture is going to be presented to you today by Professor Anuradha Ghosh, who teaches in the Department of English in Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Dr. Ghosh's specialization is in the area of literature, cinema, translation, performance, and cultural studies. Her interest goes into folklore, philosophy, literary theory, semiological studies, and ecological studies. She is a student. She has been doing her PhD from JNU, and she has been specially working on Indian cinema of the 60s and the 70s with a special focus on Bengal. Her publications include Politics of Imperialism and Counter Strategies. This is she has co-edited this book, and this has been published in 2004. She has also published Filming Fiction, Ray, Tagore, and Premchand. This was published in 2012. This is also a co-edited book. And Premchand and National Language, which she published in 2019. She has many research articles. She has guided many research students in her university, and her publications feature in both national and international journals. She has also presented papers in national and international conferences.
A very good morning to all of you. The topic of my lecture today is Cinema and Pedagogy, Changing Terrain of English Studies in India and the World. Now, while coming to the subject of cinema and its relation to pedagogy, it is a complex one indeed, and in the period of the post-pandemic, when we have gone heavily into online teaching, it becomes one of the veritable ways in which we can use cinema as a tool, as a pedagogical tool to demonstrate what we teach. Often we see that the screens of our students are turned blank. We have images which might not even reflect their names, like in my classroom I have students with names like Moonlight 30, Demon 25, etc., etc. And it is very difficult, whether you are doing it in the Google Classmeet or on a Zoom link, on whatever online platform one might be using. We find that talking to a blank screen has become a great challenge, because teaching involves a direct contact, and that direct contact is largely an eye contact that we make with our students. And since teaching has components that involves drawing from the theatre, drawing from different kinds of performances that we might be accustomed to, whether it's a musical performance or dance performances, or simply a demonstration of a lab activity. So, demonstration and performance, they go hand in hand, and we consciously or unconsciously are constantly imbibing from the world of gestures, which is a specific language today called kinesics. Now, if you refer to the first slide in my presentation, it is titled, "What is the relationship between cinema and pedagogy?" Now, cinema is a form of mass entertainment. Cinema is populist in nature. When we were growing up as children, we were debarred from the screen, as viewing cinema or viewing television serials was supposed to, or was considered to be an ill habit that we were picking up, spoiling our chances of picking up hobbies like reading or stamp collection, or doing other forms of activities which were encouraged, and cinema was seen as an evil kind of a malady. and it was seen with such disdain that often great novelists and writers stopped or stopped giving the rights to film their texts. They prevented the rights to film their texts primarily because they were not sure how a filmmaker was going to treat their texts, and largely cinema being a mode of showing and telling things, telling you stories or telling you about reality that has been documented by referring to concrete images which are multimodal and multimedial in nature. We have cinema being a kind of exercise that was not or a cinema rather was a kind of a medium which was not considered to be academic friendly, and it is much late in the 20th century. I think it is in the 60s, late 60s and late 70s, mid 70s, that it finds its way into the academia, into the ways of serious scholarly reflections on cinema start coming, and we realize that, well, cinema is one of the art forms that has evolved and has come to stay. So, the aspersions that were cast on cinema as a medium is something that we must be conscious of and aware, and the populist nature of cinema was considered to be one of the demerits of the medium. But having said that, the medium of cinema is something that we see that writers and scholars of the colonial world or the colonized world, or the third world or the developing world, as you say, as you may refer to it, because whether it is the continents of Africa, countries or African nations, or whether it is the nations of Asia which came into independence from colonial rule by after the Second World War, you have a series of countries coming into their existence, into their national modes of existence, and they also started advocating the use of cinema as a medium. And whether it is a Premchand or a Tagore, you have that they welcomed cinema as a medium of pedagogy, and they thought that there was a social purpose to cinema. That is, cinema could be used to educate people, cinema could be used to entertain, and cinema could be used to increase the ethical standards of a society and promote a certain national culture, promote a certain sub-national and regional culture. So, national cinema started forming, and you had all these film festivals which were organized within the national territory and also within the international domain, whether it is a Cannes Film Festival or whether it is the Oscar award which was given to best filmmakers, to best directors, to best actors, playback singers and what not. Now, having said that, we come to the first slide, which deals with the relationship with cinema and pedagogy, and it is not cinema versus pedagogy, because there was a moment in the 20th century when we were looking at cinema being something in the form of an adverse medium, and it had nothing to do with scholarship, it had nothing to do with academics, and it had nothing to do with pedagogy. Now, how do we look at the terms of reference in the first half of the title of the lecture, that is cinema and pedagogy. Now, if we look at what is pedagogy, we see that pedagogy, according to a dictionary definition, and here I think I have just looked up Merriam-Webster, and it seems to be the art, science or profession of teaching. Now, pay attention please to the phrasing here. It is art, science or profession of teaching. Now, then what are the implications of pedagogy as art? And second, what are the implications of pedagogy as science? Now, art is something we consider to be embellishing in nature. art is supposed to aesthetically present a reality. It is supposed to beautify the gross material physical world that we live in, and it is also supposed to capture moments of our existence which may not be so beautiful, which may have no sublimity attached to it. Art is a very complex kind of a subject to deal with, because it has the elements of that which terrifies us, that which horrifies us, that which elevates our spirit, that which creates laughter, that creates disgust, and what not. And if one goes back to what Bharat Muni says in his treatise, celebrated treatise that is the Natya Shastra, you find there are 2 chapters on rasas and bhavas, and the Indian civilizational sense or the subcontinental civilizational sense adheres to rasaswadan being something that is akin to what in English we can call tasting life. Okay. So, art has to deal with culinary habits. So, it is supposed to make us relish or taste life as it has been represented or presented to us. Now, is pedagogy art? Now, how do we establish pedagogy to be art? It is definitely an art form, because no matter whether we are dealing with equations in mathematics, or we are dealing with something to do with the hard sciences, maybe the human anatomy, and you have teachers who are teaching us and who are demonstrating reality. Let me give you an insight from what happened long ago in the 1940s in a classroom in the Medical College of Calcutta. Outside the operation theatre was a dictum written by the professor in charge of surgery, and he said, if you have nothing to do, please don't do it here. Now, what do you mean by this statement? If you have nothing to do, please don't do it here. Now, this was a board, a placard which was kept outside the operation theatre and also outside the teaching lecture halls that were there, and it was a specific instruction to students who would hang out there in the corridors and simply loiter around or gather in little groups and talk and exchange their opinions or views, or simply gossip and waste their time. And it was largely a way of frittering away your leisured moments. So, the professor in charge of surgery said that whenever he went out and asked them that what are you doing here, and they would say nothing, sir. So, he had kept it in a board saying that if you have nothing to do, then please don't do it here, with nothing in single inverted commas. Now, it is a visual graphics which has a drama in it and a narrative behind it, and it is a pedagogical exercise. Instead of making using the stick to push students away, he would silently come and tell them, look, that is what is there on the board. Okay. So, please don't do it here. So, that is teaching with a lot of humor, keeping the dignity of the student intact, but conveying the central idea that a hospital scenario or an academic institution must maintain a decor, and that decor is a decor of silence. Another example, for instance, again from the medical college, and this time it is Christian Medical College, Vellore, and these are anecdotes which I had gathered as a child growing up in a medical fraternity. So, here a teacher was teaching the human anatomy. The skeleton was in front of the first year MBBS students, and they were around more than 450 in a hall, and some of them were looking here, there and the other. And one of the questions that the teacher concerned asked was that look at the pelvic structure of the skeleton and tell me whether it is of a man or a woman. And the entire class was silent. There had already been 3 or 4 lectures given to distinguish between how one can identify anatomically, looking at the bone structure, whether the skeleton is of a man or a woman, and also which age group they might belong to. Now, when the class was silent, he got really angry and he said, "You won't be able to answer now. Had it some flesh around its waist and a petticoat tied around it and maybe a sari around it, you would very well know whether it is of a man or a woman." Now, there is this anger in the teacher which is communicated in a science classroom, and he is using irony as a mode to establish or communicate the seriousness with which students must observe. Because in the medical sciences or in the hard sciences, whether it is physical sciences or chemical sciences or the life sciences, or it is the nanotechnology or engineering as a science, you have that it is established also as an art. And again I go back to Bharat Muni in the opening chapters in volume 1 of the Manmohan Ghosh edited Natyashastra. You have it that while the stage or Rangmanch is being created, you have certain kinds of rituals being associated with it, and these rituals become crucial because there is a certain color of a flower, there is a certain color of the food items that are to be served, there is a certain kind of a coding in terms of color, in terms of fragrance, in terms of luster, etc., and how they are going to be served, which gods are going to be appeased. So, there is a whole code which might seem like gibberish to us if we do not know or we fail to recognize that it has a semiological value. Now, semiology is a term which deals with the science of culture. It deals with significatory practices and the science of understanding signs in culture. Signs, S-I-G-N-S. Okay. So, when and whichever language of scholarship we are looking at, and if we look at knowledge production as an overall phenomena, then and we try to see the social sciences, the humanities, the disciplines of languages, as well as the hard sciences and the life sciences all together, then we find that it is indeed an art. Okay. It is indeed an art because there are certain elements of coding which need to be maintained, and we are borrowing from the arts, from ecstatics, from kinesics, from music, from rhythm, from dance without knowing it. Okay. Now, in a dance class, for instance, if you ask a student to observe nature properly and see how the branches of a neem tree might be swaying, because the branches of a neem tree are structurally different from the branches of a mango tree. Now, and you tell him or her to imitate or copy the movement through gestures, he or she initially would not be able to do it if they are people from the city, because first and foremost it is difficult to find in the concrete jungles in which we live in, as we are located here in Delhi, to find neem trees and mango trees dotting the roadside. So, it takes a while for a child or even an adult to understand how that tree would sway, and if one does not know how the tree moves, then one cannot imitate it in one's action through dance or the rustle of the leaves through music or in painting or in whatever medium of expression we might be choosing. Now, we come to the next point here, pedagogy as science. Now, in a literature classroom, if I am in a literature classroom, do I use science as a pedagogy? I mean, in what way pedagogy becomes scientific in its orientation? Now, pedagogy is scientific because science deals with principles, principles of matter which is cognizable, principles of matter which can be concretized into demonstrable phenomena and thereby characterized and delineated. So, pedagogy is thereby both a science and a form of art. Now, in a literature classroom, when we are dealing with literary theory, that was a moment, and this moment of endeavor to understand literature theoretically was a kind of a competition with the sciences, when English studies, and whether it is Bangla studies or Malayalam studies or German studies or French studies, were trying to fight for a space within the institution, saying that we are relevant to humanity and doing our courses is going to lead to the health of the nation's future. Now, in order to establish this, they started borrowing terms of reference from the sciences. Say, Linnaeus' system of classification is borrowed by Vladimir Prof to understand folklore, and the entire discipline of folklore studies, which has evolved today, has a certain kind of indebtedness to the work of the Russian Vladimir Prof, who was part of the Moscow Linguistic Circle and the Opoyas, which was formed in the 1920s and the 1930s, leading to the rise of the formalist school of criticism or the formalist school of theory. Now, what were they trying to do? They were trying to categorize tale types. They were trying to categorize narratology. Todorov's entry into southern Europe, after he finds it difficult to survive in Russia, makes him join hands with people like Julia Kristeva, and in the French world you have a Roland Barthes, a Michel Foucault, and the entire gang of structuralist thinkers like Claude Lévi-Strauss and later Derrida. You have all of them joining hands to bring into discourse, and of course I should not forget the name of a Lucien Goldman or a George Lukács, who gets together to talk about homological associations which are there in literary and other forms of cultural narratives, where we intertextually, intratextually, intersemiotically, intrasemiotically, we are constantly trying to address. Then literature too can be very scientific. We talk about phylogenetic structures in literature, and when we say phylogenetic structures, we are looking at a certain mode of understanding that has evolved from genetics. And the Darwinian thought or Darwinianism percolated into the social sciences and the humanities, leading to thinkers like George Bernard Shaw and the Fabian school of socialists, who tried to create the Übermensch or the Superman. And how would the Superman be created? Not in the way the Nazis formulated it, by purifying the blood and purging the pollutants. In this case it was the Jews and the other non-Aryan, non-Semitic races. So, instead of doing that, they rather wanted to see whether reason and logic can predominate one's consciousness, and that would be the mainstay of our decision making. So, it is not romantic frills, it is not belief in certain superstructures which would make us act and feel and think in specific ways, but we would be acting, thinking and feeling in rational ways. Now, the tyranny of reason, as we hear of today in the world after structuralism, in the post-structuralist turn to thought, in the deconstructive moment of thought, makes us go towards structures, because structures are modes of perception and nothing else, if we follow the spirit of yet another dinosaur in intellectual history, and that is the works of Claude Lévi-Strauss, the great renowned anthropologist, who has been debunked into the dustbins of history by people like James Clifford and several other writers and scholars who think that he was racist without reading him in totality, without understanding the spirit of his discourses. So, these homological associations, the heterological associations which are there in our categorization of matter, and in this case within the humanities we are categorizing, for us matter means literary texts, it means musical texts, it means pieces of poetry and so on and so forth ad infinitum. I could go on and give you examples. Now, then we, in the first slide, I come yet to another question, that can pedagogy be treated therefore as a subject that can be inculcated as a skill that one needs for professional teaching. Now, this is precisely the point that we are assembled here today, this morning, to understand whether pedagogy can be imbibed as a skill where we develop the art and the science of teaching. Okay. So, how do we communicate effectively in the classroom is important, and we can only communicate effectively in the classroom once we are clear that pedagogy works both as a science and as an art form. Now, with this I come to the next slide that I have with me, and that is to deal with the changing terrain of English studies in India and the world. Now, that is the second half of the title of this morning's lecture. And if you see the slide, it is there in two parts. The first part is dealing with the conventional components of syllabus design in English studies in India and the world. I am sorry, it is not Indian, but it is India and the world. Now, we have components of teaching language in the classroom, we teach fiction in the classroom, we teach poetry, drama, literary criticism, theory, and also the world after theory, and by world I mean the intellectual world, the world of knowledge production that we belong to. So, we try to teach all this in a classroom situation in both an offline and an online mode. Now, language, for instance, modal verbs. May I come in or can I come in? Is there a difference in the use of the modals? If there is, then when do we use which term, can or may, and what determines the course of action? It is an open-ended question that I leave you with, and I am sure you are going to find the answers. Or for instance, we look into metaphors in language. Okay. Think of a sentence like, he blew his lid off. Now, he blew his lid off is part, and this is a very interesting component of cognitive linguistics, and the book I am referring to is by Margaret Kovach. So, in cognitive linguistics, the book I think is titled as Metaphors We Live By. Okay. And these metaphors are dead metaphors in language. He blew his lid off has become a saying, it is almost idiomatic. Now, before it became an idiom, it needed to have a verifiable physical concrete material reality. So, it is with the evolution or the introduction of the simple gadget pressure cooker, which we all have in our kitchens, without which our lives would have been miserable. So, with the pressure cooker and the understanding of the blowing of the whistle, which coincides with the accumulation of pressure in the form of steam inside the pressure cooker, that this metaphor has come into existence. It was a metaphor at one point of time, metaphor proper, but today it is an idiom, it is part of our language, and we no longer think of it as a metaphor. So, he blew his lid off, meaning he became very angry. He burst out in anger. Okay. Now, let me take another example, and this from the African world. The writings of Chinua Achebe. Some of you may know him, most of you may not, but you should try and read some of these writings which are there, and this is there in has found this particular text of Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, has found a place in the canons of literary studies globally, including our own country, where wherever we teach African studies or wherever we have African literature or African writings in English as a course, and we have it as an optional course, and to my mind all the optional course must be changed into compulsory courses, because the center of English studies is no longer Great Britain. The center of English studies have shifted to the Commonwealth largely, and we have different forms of English, whether it is African writings in English, whether it is Australian writings in English, whether it is Aboriginal Australian writings in English, or Dalit writings in English, or literatures from the northeast, or say northeast of India, or whether it is tribal literature or Adivasi writings in English, and ad infinitum one can go on, or it is Caribbean writings in English. So, these are writings, cultural texts in a variety of Englishes which are competing with each other to jostle their way and find a place in the canon. But coming to my example from Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and there is this protagonist Okonkwo, who is a tribal chief and he needs to think. So, whoever comes to him, and he belongs to the Igbo community. So, when his members of the tribe come to him for a decision, Achebe uses 1.5 page almost to translate into English an African proverb which has only a phrase, which is only a phrase in the Igbo language. So, the notion is Okonkwo hears it with one ear, and then he closes the other ear with the other hand, and then he lets the words settle in his head. He needs the words and the thought to be cooked in his mind. So, for 3 days and 3 nights he would not speak, and he would meet no one. He would be almost in a situation of being in a fast. He would meditate, and then he would call the person or the group of people, whoever wanted an advice from him. When the idea was well cooked in his mind, he delivered it to them. And therefore, a tribal chief as a soothsayer or a sayer of truths, and thereby his wisdom becomes prophetic. He leads because he has the consciousness to lead, because he is not hasty in his decisions, or she is not hasty in her decisions. So, they lead because they think, they reflect, and then they decide. They do nothing in a hurry. So, you have that in our syllabus design, there are certain crucial components in the conventional syllabus design of English studies in India and the world. Unfortunately, in our country, we are taking a lot of time to change. For instance, since we are best as imitators and we are great worshippers of Lord Hanuman, we do not understand the spirit of Lord Hanuman. We rather vulgarize our attachment to Lord Hanuman by imitating like an ape. Lord Hanuman was a servant, a pujari of Rama and Sita, and he had these icons in his breast because he had devotion in him. Now, in our context, we neither have devotion, nor have a commitment, we are nor engaged, we do nothing, we do not endeavor, we do not strive, we do not suffer, and all we can do is imitate and parrot what the Western world thinks. So, for us, the gospel or the new Bible or the new Gita is always something delivered to us from America or from Europe. Can you name scholars from our world, the former colonies, who have thought independently? If they have, then we put them to discourses which we today say are from the global south. And who are these scholars? Most of them fall under the umbrella called anti-colonial thought, or scholars who promote decolonialism politically, or scholars who are trying to think independent of formulations of the West. And in English studies, this is a malady. And this malady has percolated also in our Bhasha literatures, in the departments of our Bhasha literatures, where it has become mandatory to know a Foucault or a Barthes. Now, it is important for us to know our Foucault and Barthes, but it is also very important to know Upanishads. It is also very important to know our epics. It is important to know Tolkappiyam, the Tamil classic text. It is important to know about Nupilan and the traditions of the Northeast. It is so important to know our own civilization and culture, our own history, our own languages. It is so important to know how many varieties of Hindi we speak in, but before we declare it one form of Hindi as Rashtrabhasha. Because before it became a Rashtrabhasha, we were fighting for a common language, not a national language. It is yet another politics, and if you are interested, you can read the book that I have edited with my colleagues called Premchand's Reflections on Language, titled Rashtrabhasha. Premchand on Language on Rashtrabhasha. It has been published from Akar Books a few years back. Now, so the sum total is that our syllabus design needs to move into contemporary patterns of consciousness. It needs to be reflective, it needs to be interrogative, if we want to be a leading nation of the world. If we do not want to be the Tota of Tota Kahini of Tagore's play, and here I mean Rabindranath Tagore, or Tagore as you talk of, anglicizing his name. So, in Rabindranath Tagore's anecdote, Tota Kahini, you Google and you will find it, and you will know what a spoof of education he makes it out to be. And having said that, and I leave it there, this thought with you, I come to updated or contemporary syllabus design. Now, updated or contemporary syllabus design, what should it include? First, a multidisciplinary, and I would like to add an interdisciplinary approach. Now, before going further, I want you to pause and think. We are all talking of interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity, while our own foundations in the discipline are getting weakened. So, when we are in a history department, we want to study history as literature. When we are in a literature department, we want to study literature as sociological text, and we are doing this ad infinitum. And then the crisis within social sciences and humanities is this, that we are all the time trying to define what is it that we deal with in our subjects. So, we all have a class or a chapter dealing with what is economics, what is political science, what is sociology, what is history, and I can also tell you who are the people who wrote these books. What is history is written by E.H. Carr, what is political science is written by somebody else, and there is not one definition, there are so many. What is economics? You start from Adam Smith. So, is it the wealth acquiring properties of a nation that deals with economics, or there is something else that is wealth and welfare together? What is economics is a fundamental question. What is macroeconomics, what is microeconomics, it is relevant even today. And as a student of literature or a student of cultural studies, as a student of cinema, am I not supposed to comment on it? Very well, we all have the right to comment on anything we feel like, and we need to comment in an informed manner. So, interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity is very good, as long as we know where our roots are. So, ROOTS, roots must be strong, and thereby it is only when we are rooted that we can take roots, ROUTES. So, without the roots and the roots, the dialectical operation does not hold. Now, having said that, let us shift to the next point, that is a shift in the context of literary production. Now, when we are looking into the bulk of literature or the bulk of films, the bulk of performance texts which are coming up, theatre, okay, we find that it is no longer, the home is no longer Great Britain, the home is no longer only the United States of America. India is producing an equal number, and even if not more number of texts in Indian English writings, and in a variety of parallel genres that has come into existence, which have found their way into the category listings of a Penguin or an OUP or a Routledge or whatever foremost publication houses that you can think of. So, then if the number of English users has increased, and we, the Indian subcontinent or the SAARC nations together, we together outnumber Great Britain and even America, then where is the shift located in our own home context? So, what should we be teaching in the canons? A Shakespeare in the Purana way, as the Britishers told us? We will still ask a question like, is John Galsworthy's Justice a social tragedy? Or can justice be, the play Justice be called a tragedy in the Aristotelian sense of the term? We will still keep on teaching Aristotle's Poetics without realizing that he never wrote a line to establish what tragedy is. He was not interested in defining the principles of what makes a good tragedy. All he was interested in was writing about the history of literary genres that existed, the history of performative genres that existed, and we forget that Aristotle was translated from the Arabic world into Greek, like our Aflatun or Plato was rediscovered by Europe through Arabic. The texts were lost in English. So, there are multiple translations, and we find our identities, we find even our classics through translations, and we singularly forget this fact, and we would choose to have poetics even in a classical literature class. We will do our legends of Greece and Rome, but we will not do legends from Egypt, we will not do legends from China, we will know nothing about the legends in India, we will not know the legends of the Ho, the Aos, the Thankul Nagas, the Pumai Nagas. We will not know all these legends because ye to achut hai. We do not need to touch them. We will not know the legends of the Dome community. What is the Duma? What does it embody? Where does the term Dome come from? Is it the spirit world that we are looking at? We do not need to know them. Now, the problem is we do need to know them, and we need to redefine the canons of English studies, at least in India, to begin with. And we, in some universities, we have already started doing it, and I belong to a department which is taking this initiative forward. And then we come to yet another point here, that is emergence of several genres and cycles of literary production that are intercontinental, transcontinental, national, subnational, transnational, and regional, local, indigenous, ethnic in their biases and terms of reference. Now, here I have already mentioned what I mean here while I was discussing point 2 in the second part of this slide, that is, the genres and cycles of literary production, they work almost like a rhizome. You must have seen, I do not know, I should not say you must have seen, but you must be knowing that knowledge production is rhizomatic in nature. Though when I said root and roots, I referred to a taproot kind of a model, and I am borrowing terminology from Anti-Oedipus, from Delusion Guattari. But I am not only borrowing from them, I am borrowing from my own experience of trying to clear my garden or from weeds, doing it myself. It is only when you see carefully and you see how fibrous root systems grow, then you understand what generically would mean the terms intercontinental, transcontinental, national, subnational, transnational, and agram bagram would mean, because knowledge production is rhizomatic in nature. Adrak, you take off a piece and plant it anywhere, a new plant comes up, and it has a way of proliferating in any way. It is almost like water. You spill it over and you cannot control its flow unless you keep it in a container. Now, I have a glass of water in front of me. Now, if I spill it on the floor, it is going to take its own course. I cannot determine its course. Now, rhizomatic structures are like that. The fluidity of knowledge systems are like that. So, knowledge systems are embedded, so they follow a taproot kind of a model, but knowledge systems and knowledge production is also rhizomatic in nature, and we must understand the fluidity with which it moves and the kinesics it thereby generates. Now, lastly, I have a point here, translation and adaptation and its impact for English studies. Now, translation and adaptation, I do not mean it only in the form of Rupantar or Bhashantar. Okay. Bhashantar that is moving from one language to the other. Hindi में लिखा है, बांग्ला में लिख दिया या अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद कर लिया. I don't mean that only a mechanical kind of a rendering. I mean how the spirit of one text is taken into and infused into another. For me, theoretical reflections in literature, that is literary theory proper, and also when we come to the phase of after theory or post theory, is as much translative in its orientation, as much adaptative in its orientation, what we study as a specific case in cinema studies. And it is only when we are aware of literatures in translation that we can find a moment to pause and reflect on what has happened to Vishwa Sahitya or world literature, what has happened to world cinema, and why do we need to still think globally, and not only globally as a human species, but also in the terms of a planetarian consciousness, where the documentary of the life of an ant would be as important in terms of a Atma Jivani, because I have found many texts, at least in Bangla, which deal with the lives and autobiographies or self-writings, as you call, of ants, bumblebees and what not, okay, or the earthworm, because they are God's creation and they are fine in their own way. And if we cannot gather wonder, or if we do not pause and reflect what they are like, then we fail to be both students of science and the humanities. And by science, I always mean both sciences, the social sciences and the hard sciences and the life sciences altogether. Now we come to the next slide, which deals with what is cinema. Now cinema, you can read the slide, so I won't go line by line into it. Cinema is largely defined as motion picture. Now I come to the third sub point here. For Tagore, cinema is Ruper Cholot Probaho. Roop means beauty, Cholot is dynamic, Probaho flow. Now this is a phrase that he uses to describe cinema in a letter to Murari Bhaduri written on 26 November 1929. And this is the time when the silent film has come of age. Sound was yet not added, and Tagore was already trying to do Noti Binodini as a film text. So now Ruper Cholot Probaho in English would be the movement of beauteous forms. Now cinema can be described in no other way than what Tagore had defined it for us, and his definition is not limited because he is talking symbolically, he is not talking literally. Now beauty resides in an earthworm too. Beauty is there in a blade of grass, beauty is there in the lady or the man that is beside me, and in all the audience that I see in front of me who are absent, and in their absence I find a presence. So beauty is something that is perceived, and when it is perceived, we find that the dictionary definitions of what is cinema is precisely useless. It can be only defined in terms of a visual Esperanto, a kind of a language that deals with the medium of communication and the medium of signification, because communication is when we literally need to say something, like we say that get me a glass of water, I am thirsty, I do not mean it in metaphors. Okay. But when I say somebody has come in late to the class and I say aap to bara jaldi aa gaye, I ironically mean the opposite of what I say. So I signify a reality, I am not literally always communicating, even when I am in everyday, doing an everyday use of language. And in literature, we are in a signifying system. And if you go by Umberto Eco's what is semiotics, then Umberto Eco has yet a third component of language, and that is the signal system. You have the traffic light, लाल हो गया बत्ती, मतलब आप आगे मत जाइए, okay, or you wave and say stop. Okay. Your body gestures are always talking in a language that signals. We are also talking, and talking within quotations, we are also talking by communicating literally through a verbal medium, but the verbal medium fails because we are communicating in a multi-channeled mode. Okay. And cinema, and finally of course we signify where we the expressive reality of what cinema is. It becomes clear to us because we might be telling a story, but we are telling a story by showing the story. In a literature text, we have to imagine what Captain Ahab looked like in Moby Dick, in Herman Melville's Moby Dick, because Captain Ahab is one of the protagonists and he is blinded in one eye. Now, Melville does not tell us which eye was he blinded in. Now, if I am making a film, I can't make, because Melville did not tell me whether he was blind in the right eye or the left eye, I can't make him blind in one eye in one scene and blind in the other eye in the other scene. I have to stick to the right eye blindedness or the left eye blindedness all through my film. Okay. But if I am playing around with which eye he was blinded in, then I am becoming meta cinematic. That is, I am talking about cinematic forms of adaptation through cinema itself. So, we keep playing around with these kinds of languages, and of course, the ideas about cinema being a visual kind of an Esperanto, that cinema is studied both as a verbal language and also as a visual language simultaneously holds ground today. And because it is a multi-channeled mode of communication, because it uses multiple media and multiple modes, different platforms. You can watch a film on your phone, you can watch a film on the screen in a small laptop or in a huge screen or in a cinema hall, or you can listen to the news, or you might be looking at the way the Taliban is seizing Afghanistan, and you are looking at it and you are looking at a narrative in multiple formats. Now, this multiplicity of the format creates yet more complexity in cinema studies, but what remains to stay, remains with us is the idea that because it is audiovisual in nature and because it has these multiple formats in which it can convey an idea, so cinema becomes an effective tool of pedagogy. And hence we come to the next slide, that is aspects of cinema as an effective pedagogical tool. Now, what are the best aids for teaching in a classroom? It is the chalk and the talk method is still very important to me, because in an offline mode I am scribbling on the board. What I scribble today about a text, tomorrow I might be saying something which is 180-degree opposite. Okay. So, that is dynamic thinking with the chalk and talk method. For me, no method is obsolete. Every method has a history, every graphic mode has a history, every mode of demonstration has a history, and we cannot be outside history. Okay. So, there is nothing being dated in the world of ideas, there is nothing dated in the world of practice. So, teaching is a specific kind of practice. So, one of the conventional aids in pulpit mode of teaching, where we are looking at number of students from 80 to 100, and sometimes in my classrooms there are 150 students spilling over, where we used to think, there was a time when we used to think that 150 students do not turn up for a class, and when they do, mind you, it is so difficult because our class sizes can only accommodate at best 75 or 80. But with courses like general English that we teach, and we teach 2 or 3 groups together of the undergraduates, and when we are teaching 2 or 3 groups together, and if fortunately or unfortunately you are an engaged teacher, because you do not treat the business non-seriously, कि वो महीने का अंत पर सैलरी मिल जाएगा, पढ़ाओ या ना पढ़ाओ. But now, if you do not belong to that mode of teachers, which I am sure you are not, and if you take teaching seriously, then you will find that students are there sitting also on the window sills. And this is common story regarding the legendary teachers like Professor Randhir Singh, who used to teach in Delhi University, and students from St. Stephen's would be gathering there. In a lecture by Eric Hobsbawm or it was on Eric Hobsbawm. Romila Thapar, I remember, said in India International Center long back, and Amartya Sen walked into that auditorium. He had a lecture in a parallel session, but the entire entire intellectual circle of Delhi was rooted to this commemorative lecture of on the works of Eric Hobsbawm, a British historian. So Romila Thapar was a student then in Britain, and she said from her college to hear Hobsbawm, they would cut their own classes and be hanging on windowsills to hear Hobsbawm. So likewise, when you, in our context, because Professor Randhir Singh used to say, and he was the jailmate of Bhagat Singh in Lahore jail, if you do not know about his history, because he was a man from the political sciences, and he said that because he could not be a revolutionary, he became a teacher. And he became a teacher in a neglected discipline which is called political science, changing the terms of definition of what is political science. So in Professor Randhir Singh's class also, you had people flocking together because he had a baap wala pyar, and this is his own language. He said he used to always refer to Mahatma Gandhi, and he says bapu ka pyar samajhna parega. Okay, that is, you need to understand the affection of a Gandhi. You cannot criticize Gandhi without understanding the nature of his affection, and that nature of his affection was very different from the kinds of affection that are in circulation. So the aids for teaching, Randhir Singh using a PowerPoint, no chance, it was not there, and yet he was a brilliant teacher. Now you go back in history, Guru Nanak as a teacher. Okay, Guru Nanak as a teacher was a great teacher, he was prophetic. What aid did he use? Neither the chalk or talk method or all the methods that we use today in the traditional classrooms where we do B.Ed training and M.Ed training and what not. Now I am not debunking the Faculty of Education and the important contribution they have towards pedagogical studies, but what I am trying to argue is that these tools might be there, but the tools can only help if you have ideas to go with them. Otherwise, tools become mechanical. Tools are, after all, congealed human labor. So technology is nothing but congealed human labor. Now because it is congealed human labor, you cannot have tools used in a stultified kind of a mode. You need to think about your tools, and cinema thereby can become an effective pedagogical tool. Now with this, I have left you with a number of slides, but I will come to only, I will talk about only one slide. Now these are images from Kalakshetra Manipur, and if you are interested in the works of Kalakshetra Manipur, then you may see it, but I would like to comment particularly on the slide which is a still shot from the play Pebet. Now suppose you are in a history classroom and you want to talk about the history of colonization, and you have little children sitting in front of you, and I imagine my own the school children, for instance, in class 5, 6 or 7, they are sitting there getting bored, and you are trying to communicate to them how bad the idea of colonization really is, how oppression worked. Now they can't make head or tail, and if you are in a virtual classroom, then while you are teaching, they are playing online games. And what kind of games? It could be a Roblox, it could be something else, and we see that online gaming is a kind of malady. They are shopping online, they are killing online, and it is breeding violence, and it is breeding commoditization and nothing else. So now if you are teaching and suddenly you show this still shot from Pebet, now look at the colored sequencing. There are earth tones here, and Sabitri Kanhailal, who is the central figure in the sarong that she is wearing, which is blue in color with a brown blouse. Sorry, it is a Haisnam Sabitri, not Sabitri Kanhailal. So Haisnam Sabitri is the mother Pebet. Pebet means bird, and she is looking at, there is in the opposite role, there is the cat monk played by her son Haisnam Tomba. Now Tomba is in the role of the cat monk, and the entire play has only 2 lines. The bird sing or the bird chatter is te tu. So sometimes it is te tu, te tu, te tu, te tu, te tu, te tu, te tu. The mother bird talking, calling, talking to a fledgling, and the cat monk, and this is a play or a parody of the Vaishnavite colonization of Manipur, where the 7 Salais, in order to centralize rule in Manipur, the 7 Salais or the 7 clans by King Garibani Baza was homogenized, and they were made to conform to the Vaishnavite faith, which went from Bengal via Shantidas Goshai. Okay. So, this is a parody on Shantidas Goshai, which is being played by Hesnam Tomba. And what does he do? He is enacting the role of a cat in saffron, and he is using a Rudraksh mala, and the line that he says is Shamukaka Lilikaka Shamukaka Lilikaka Shamukaka Lilikaka Shamukaka Lilikaka Lilikaka Lilikaka, or Shamukaka Lilikaka Shamukaka Lilikaka Shamukaka Lilikaka Shamukaka Lilikaka Lilikaka Lilikaka. What is he trying to do? Entice the birds. First entice them, lure them, trap them into the colonized reality of a higher culture, then enslave them, and then indoctrinate them and annihilate their spirit to think freely. Now, if you come to the slide which is from the play Laigi Macha Singha by Dr. Hesnam Kanhailal, the late Hesnam Kanhailal ji. So, you have a certain formation which is triangular in shape, a formation which is there in the theatre of say Badal Sarkar also, and what comes to my mind is the play Spartacus. Okay. So, the 3 sticks that you see at the background are placed in a certain manner, and there is a phallic insertion of subordination, and this subordination is very clear. Again, it is Tomba at the back with that gesture. Okay. Now, the kind of subordination that the land undergoes, and you have the 3 figures of the woman with Hesnam Sabitri ji in the middle, you have a certain kind of domination happening. Now, is it a gendered domination, or is it the domination of one culture by another? Is it the domination, exploitation and oppression of one system of thought by another? Now, this is where the role of pedagogy and cinema comes in. We can open up avenues of other cultures in our home screens to our students to make them understand history, the diversity of culture, the diversity of history, the diversity of philosophies, the diversity of theologies, the diversity of ethics, and celebrate the plural rhythms and the plural consciousness that we breathe in, we live in, and where for us the life of an ant, the life of a bumblebee, the life of a snake, the life of a stone, the life of a tree, the life of a human being is equivalently important. It has an equivalent resonance, it has an equivalent signification, and we need to fight for that world which hails the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Thank you.